Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We have Judy Pace, who's a professor at the University of San Francisco in the Teacher Education Department, and she is going to be talking a little bit with us about her new book titled Hard Questions, which is centered around learning to teach controversial issues in the classroom. Judy, if there's anything you want to add a little bit about your book.
Thanks so much, Valentina. It's great to be here with you. So here's the book, and it's based on a study that I did of 4 teacher educators located in 3 different countries and their pre-service teachers, and is published by Rowman Littlefield, and it just came out a couple of weeks ago. And I'm really hoping that it helps teachers and teacher educators and even school leaders and policymakers and interested parents to learn more about how teaching controversial issues is practiced in lots of different locations, especially in politically divided areas.
Thank you so much. Yes, I myself am a recent graduate from the University of San Francisco. I had the pleasure of working with you, Judy, in a few courses there in the teacher education program, and I definitely feel that after reading the book, there was a lot to learn from it. So going straight into it, I feel like tackling hard questions in the classroom has been especially relevant this past year, given racial uprisings, the election, the pandemic, climate crisis. I mean, the list goes on. So, how do you feel your book is a response to these turbulent times?
That is such a great question. We have lived through, as you know, Valentina, a time of unprecedented political crisis, which, despite renewed hopefulness, isn't going away. So teachers are being called on to help young people make sense of these pressing topics and their historical roots, questions of social justice and human rights, and facts versus falsehoods. And we're being called on to teach students how to engage in civic discourse, which is fundamental to democracy. You know, I've been arguing for years about how we need to strengthen social studies education, but now its critical importance is widely recognized. We desperately need teaching that helps young people evaluate critically the information that they're bombarded with on social media and the different arguments embedded in controversial issues and the best ways to tackle problems that matter to them and to society. So I hope my book provides concrete encouragement and tools for educators at all levels to meet this crucial moment, because I think the future of our nation and the world depends on it.
Definitely, thank you. Your book clearly tackled a lot of different areas. You traveled to 3 different countries, you were at 4 different universities, so many interviews and different texts and materials that I'm sure you had to read to prepare for. So it was clearly a very ambitious project that you took on. So, what made you want to conduct this sort of research in the first place?
Well, Valentina, we actually know a lot about how to teach controversial issues and what it looks like in different regional and national contexts. There's been lots and lots of research on it, and we know what the obstacles are and we know what supports it. But we know very little about how teacher educators prepare new teachers to take this on and what happens when new teachers actually attempt it. So my study answers these questions. And I also wanted to focus on teaching controversial issues in politically divided places and in societies that are still struggling with a legacy of violent conflict, like Northern Ireland, where educators have been doing this important work for a long time. And they offer vital perspectives on it that I think can be especially helpful for what we're going through in the US right now. And doing research in these different locations with these amazing people was really fascinating. So that's why I did the study.
Thank you. Yeah, the book explores how to approach controversial issues in history, citizenship, and social studies education. Um, Going back to the controversial issues specifically, I noticed throughout the book there was many different ways of defining controversial issues. So, would you say that there's one right way to define controversial issues, and if there is, how would you define it?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think there's one right way, and it depends a lot on the subject that's being taught.
Mhm.
You know, whether it's history or citizenship or economics or even science. Scholars define controversial issues in general terms as significant questions that divide public opinion, whether it be about the past or about the present. But there are many more nuanced definitions, and that scholarship is really important and interesting. For teachers, I think it's really important for us to think about which controversial issues we really want to open up from multiple perspectives with our students. So, these days there's a great deal of emphasis on solidarity with social justice causes, and I support that. But often there are valid competing perspectives on questions related to social justice, environmental policy, and other problems. So, for example, what are the best ways to fight climate change? How should we hold authoritarian leaders accountable? What are the best ways, or rather, when should free speech be limited? And many, many more hard questions that should be examined from different perspectives, as long as those perspectives are based on factual evidence, don't harm people, and are legitimate. So I think, teachers should think about what are open questions that have not been settled, and which are the ones that they're most interested in exploring with students from different perspectives and given the curriculum that they're teaching.
Thank you. Going off of that a little bit, once we've, decided on a definition or kind of what route we want to take controversial issues, I noticed also while there were many similarities across the four teacher educators that you observed, there was also some clear differences in the way that they approached teaching controversial issues. So, for example, we have Paula and Mark, who are both in Northern Ireland. And Paula takes maybe a more pragmatic, protective approach, and it's a little bit more structured, whereas Mark's approach is more focused on relationship building. It's a little bit more organic and responsive to emotions. What do you think about this difference? Would you say that there's a right approach to teaching controversial issues?
So that's a really, really interesting question. Um, I naturally gravitate towards a relational approach, and I very much appreciate and resonate with Mark's emphasis on building trust and tapping emotions, which I think play a huge role in learning. And we know that motivated reasoning means that the way people think about issues is really affected by their social identity and their emotions. And so I appreciate Mark's desire to tackle all of that. And but I also found Paula's reasoning for a protective and pragmatic approach to be actually quite compelling, especially when teachers are faced with so many demands and institutional constraints, like really short classes where they have to teach a lot of complex material. And some of the pre-service teachers that I write about in the book speak directly to those challenges. And in a starkly divided society, I understand teachers' fears about triggering emotions that may be really difficult for students and teachers to deal with. So I wouldn't say that one way is better than the other. I would rather that more teachers try to take up controversial issues in ways that feel safer and more feasible for them than for teachers not to try it at all. And with so many other questions about teaching, it depends, right, on the conditions under which teachers are working and on their own capabilities and orientations and comfort levels. And these things may shift over time and place. But I think that maybe being protective and pragmatic is a good place to start. And it's interesting, in practice, Paula's and Mark's approaches weren't so dramatically different in that they both taught what I call contained risk taking. So they both taught their pre-service teachers a set of strategies for containing the risks that can accompany teaching controversial issues, especially in polarized societies. And those strategies really help teachers be very thoughtful about how they select and frame issues, how they create a supportive environment, and how they choose appropriate pedagogical methods.
Definitely. Hadn't thought of the similarities in that context before, so that was definitely helpful. Um, yeah, I guess going back a little bit to how you mentioned different things are right in different contexts, or different approaches might be more better suited in different contexts. I found the book to be very helpful for not just new teachers like myself, but also for teachers who have maybe never really taken that leap to teaching controversial issues in the classroom. And I found the book helpful because there were so many methods and tools for how to approach that in the classroom. So, would you say that there's particular methods that you think new teachers should try?
Another great question. Teaching contexts and conditions vary so much. So another big idea for my study is adapting pedagogical tools when learning to teach controversial issues. I found that the pre-service teachers selected from the toolkit that they took away from their methods courses the methods that would work best for their students, their lessons, and the schools that they were working in, and their own emerging capabilities and identities. So there were methods that I found to be particularly popular among the pre-service teachers. So the structured academic controversy, also known as deliberation, the walking debate, and source analysis activities in history classes. But these were adapted as needed to fit the realities of classroom life. So for example, with structured academic controversy, Margaret extended a SAC over a 2-day period and had her students find additional resources to supplement the ones that she provided, whereas Andrew had to modify the deliberation to something that happened just in pairs of students for 10 to 15 minutes because he was working under severe time constraints. So I really applaud teachers' efforts to adapt in ways that fit their circumstances.
Thank you. So, given how much important content is in your book, I'm not surprised to say that I know you're already getting a very enthusiastic response to the book. Are there any particular book activities that you're most looking forward to?
Thank you, Valentina. I am really, really looking forward to interacting with educators from around the US and even around the world. So next month, I'm conducting a Zoom workshop with the Peace Education Hub at the University of Sarajevo with educators from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Rwanda, Colombia, and the UK. So I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping, fingers and toes crossed, to make it over to the UK and Ireland this coming fall for a series of events with teachers and teacher educators and their students and community groups. And I'm planning some activities with teacher educators and social studies scholars here in the US who have been reimagining the work on teaching controversial issues in ways that highlight social justice concerns in the US. So I'm excited about generating new possibilities from all of that.
Wow, you've got a lot of things lined up. Thank you so much, Judy, for sharing a little bit more about your book that I'm sure many people are going to get so much valuable information and content from, like I know I did.
Thank you, Valentina. It's been great to talk with you. I appreciate it. I actually have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So last semester in the curriculum development and design class, you created an amazing unit plan for fifth graders on voting. And
Thanks.
I wonder whether you have any ideas about what you've learned from reading the book that could help you focus maybe more on teaching controversial issues within that unit.
Yes, definitely. Actually, I kept thinking about my voting unit as I was reading it, and like what sort of changes or tweaks I would make to make it more centered around controversial issues. Because obviously, in terms of the election season and voting, there are many controversial issues that come up. So, for a little bit of context, my unit was around voting rights, voting history, and the voting process. And I structured it so that although it was created around election season in 2020, it's something that could be taught in any year and hopefully any time period. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of methods and tools, both theoretical and practical, that I could implement that I got from your book and from the examples of the teacher educators. So I had a lot of Socratic seminars in there. And although I had originally just kind of put the Socratic seminar in there as an activity that came to mind, I think I have a very much more structured way of how I could actually go about implementing them, or other things, other forms of discussion and deliberation that I could put in place of Socratic seminars, like the case studies or town hall meetings, I think was another one that I read in there, and the SAC form of deliberation and discussion. And also more just for myself, there was lots of different ways of approaching it from a teacher's point, like before you even go into the classroom. So, for example, Paula and Ian both talked about making sure that you're very familiar with yourself and what it is that you want to come out of it, what you're teaching, and you know your own biases, and you're very familiar with the subject matter before even going into the classroom, which is something that I would definitely take away. And also, Mark talked a lot about creating a very warm and safe environment, and so did Liz, in the classroom, so students feel comfortable, which is also something that I definitely want to make sure I implement.
That's awesome, Valentina. This is music to my ears. You know, actually, one of the things that we haven't talked about yet was the different roles that teachers play when teaching controversies, whether they be open controversies or settled controversies or controversies that we're not sure what to call because they should be settled, but they're not.
Yeah,
And so, you know, teachers really need to think about whether they're going to be impartial, whether they're going to be an ally, whether, you know, when they might play devil's advocate to bring in other points of view. So really, really important to think about the teacher's positionality and also the specific roles that they're going to play when exploring issues with students.
yeah.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
sure we could go on and on
I
forever.
know we could. Thank you so much, Judy, for talking again more about the book. I'm sure people will get tons of valuable information from it.
Thanks so much, Valentina.